In this lesson, we're going to learn how to round with Sig Figs. First, what we're going to do is we're going to take a large number and we are going to round to a certain number of Sig Figs. So the first question asks us to round to 7 Sig Figs. So going from left to right, I'm going to underline the first 7 significant digits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then I'm going to draw a line up here. Okay, so those are the 7 numbers we know that we're going to keep, and then we're going to look at the next digit here. So are we going to round this up to 0.535, or do we leave it as 0.534? Well, if you remember your rounding rules, if your number is between 5 and 9, we round up to the next number. So this would be 1245.535. In our next example, it asks us to round to 6 Sig Figs. So going from left to right, we're going to underline the first 6 significant figures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we'll draw a line up. We look at our next number here. So are we rounding up or rounding down? Well, we would round down in this case. So 1245.53. Okay, rounding to 5 Sig Figs, underline the first 5 numbers, and then we look at the next digit. So just like the previous example, we are going to round down. All right, hopefully you're starting to see how this works. For 4 Sig Figs, we are going to round up to 1, 2, 4, 6. Now here's where it gets a little trickier. For 3 Sig Figs, we know that it's going to be 1, 2, 5, and then we need to include a 0 here. Remember, we're not going to include a decimal point here. If I put a decimal point after the 0, we would have 4 significant figures. Without the decimal point, this is just 3. For 2 Sig Figs, we're going to round down. And finally, for 1 Sig Fig, we are also going to round down. And again, we leave off the decimal point so that we are not counting those trailing zeros. And that's how to round a large number with significant figures. So look at this number. So we did some math here. 0.25 times 0.123, and we got an answer of 0.03075. So how do you think we should round that number? Should we round it as 0.03? Should we round it as 0.031? Like, what's the correct number here? How do we round this? Usually it's given in the directions, but what do you think? How would you round this if there weren't directions? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today with our rules on Sig Figs after calculations. So here are the rules. Rule number 1 is pretty easy to follow. So multiply or divide in a normal fashion. So just multiply the number. But the important thing here is you want to make sure that you do not round until you get your final answer. Step number 2, round the final answer based on the least number of significant figures of any number. So we're going to do 3 examples. It's relatively straightforward, not that much different than what we were doing previous. But let's go ahead and dive into this. So here's our first example. 0.51 times 53.2. So if you punch that in on your calculator, you get an answer of 27.132. Okay, so we just multiplied as normal. We didn't round any of those numbers. So now what we need to do is we need to go through the numbers we multiplied and figure out how many sig figs we have. So in our first number here, 0.51, we have 2 sig figs. That leading 0 does not count. In our second number here, we have 3 non-zero numbers, so this would be 3 sig figs. So our second rule was round the final answer based on the least number of sig figs in any number. So that would be, whoops, not 3, but 2 sig figs in this case. Okay, so 2 sig figs is the least number of sig figs. So our final answer, we want to round this to 2 significant figures. So we'll underline the first 2 numbers that matter from left to right, the first 2 significant digits, and then we look at the third. So if we were rounding this number to 2 sig figs, it would be 27. Let's do another example. 12.43 times 38. So step 1, multiply or divide like normal. So we're multiplying in this case. I got 472.34. So let's see, I've got 4 non-zero numbers here, so 4 significant figures. And in the second number, I have 2 significant figures. So 2 is the least number of significant figures. So from left to right, let's underline the first 2 significant digits and then look at the third. So if I were rounding this to 2 significant figures, this would be 470. And remember, we're going to leave off the decimal point. If we add a decimal place, that would make it 3 significant figures. But without the decimal place, that trailing 0 does not count. Let's look at one more example here. This is a division problem. So even though this is division, we're going to divide just like normal. So 804.2 divided by 37.1. This is a much larger number. 21.67654987. Oh, that's a lot of non-zero numbers there. Okay, so we have 4 significant figures here. They're all non-zero. Here I have 3 significant figures. Again, they're all non-zeros. So 3 is the smaller number. So we're going to round our final answer to 3 significant digits. So the first 3 numbers, 21.6, and then we look at the fourth number here, the fourth digit. So in this case, we're going to round up. This will be 21.7. And that's it. Those are the rules for multiplying and dividing with significant figures.